All right, everyone, let's get the show started. Welcome to Office Hours. It's January 29th, 2020. My name is Eric Osterman, and I'll be leading the conversation. I'm the CEO and founder of Cloud Posse. We are a DevOps accelerator. We help startups own their infrastructure in record time by building it for you and then showing you the ropes. For those of you new to the call, the format of this call is very informal. My goal is to answer your questions. Feel free to unmute yourself at any time if you want to jump in and participate. We host these calls every week. We automatically post the recording of the session to the Office Hours channel as well as follow up via email so you can share it with your team. If you want to share something in private, go ahead and just ask and we can temporarily suspend the recording. One other thought, since we're now syndicating this as a podcast, if you're tuning in that way, you can go register at cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/office hours if you want to participate in a live session. All right, with that said, let's kick this off. Here are some talking points that I thought about for today, the things that came up in our Slack team. One is, what are some DevOps interview questions? What are your favorites? What's worked well for you in your style? I know most companies here are probably hiring, so this is something you do a lot. And then another article I just posted, which was more or less a brain dump. So it wasn't like very editorialized content, but I did a trial over this weekend, spent about 10 hours setting up Jenkins according to what I perceive as some of the best practices. And I posted those in an article here. If you go to cloudposse.com/DevOps/Jenkins pros and cons 2020, you'll see that. And I'll post these links here in Office Hours. All right, so before we get started on these, I just want to see, are there any questions related to DevOps, problems you're trying to get solved, questions about Terraform, questions about Kubernetes, anything's okay?
Yes, Dale here.
Hey, Dale.
What are you doing? All right, so we've been using Datadog primarily, well, the last few months for monitoring our deployments, Kubernetes application, all of that. And based on the nature of our company with healthcare, we're looking to migrate that to something else, mainly because of a BAA being signed. And we're looking right now to either go towards Splunk, which is currently being used, but mainly by the IT ops guys. Personally, I am looking at Prometheus and Grafana as an option. I'm just wondering, what everyone else is using and why, pros and cons.
All right. You faded. Your voice is a little faint, so I'm going to try and repeat what you just said. Correct me if I'm wrong. So you guys have been using Datadog today, both for monitoring and for log collection, and you guys are looking at alternatives now, of which one of them is Splunk, another paid option. Are your requirements to do something managed like a Splunk, or can you go self-managed inside of the cluster?
Yeah, I think that's an option to go self-managed.
Okay, and it's both for logs and for monitoring, right? Not just for logs, because you mentioned Splunk.
Right, both, yes.
All right. Well, I'll chime in, but anybody else here have a strong opinion on this topic?
If you have any kind of open source stack, I mean, Prometheus plus EFK is kind of the winner right now.
That's EFK? What's the F?
Yeah, EFK is Elasticsearch. F is Fluentd, yeah, and then Logstash. No, Elasticsearch, Fluentd, and Kibana. Right. F replaced L.
Okay.
Yeah.
For logging, for metrics, Prometheus Grafana is.
I would like to mention that if you do go that route and you are generating a lot of events, shipping directly from Fluentd into Elasticsearch might put you in a world of hurt because you can generate logs sometimes a lot faster than Elasticsearch can consume them unless you really scale up your Elasticsearch clusters, and that gets expensive. So one of the options there is to ship that by way of an intermediary like Kinesis. And then what's cool about that is you can ship all your logs with Fluentd from the Kubernetes clusters into Kinesis, and then Kinesis drains them into Elasticsearch and S3. So you can have a retention policy on Amazon S3 where you have your logs going back for 3 years, and it won't cost you too much, but you keep everything current in Elasticsearch maybe for the last week or for the last 30 days or something like that.
So I do recall you guys mentioning doing an architecture that actually does federation with Prometheus from the last session. Just as an overview, what does that really look like?
Yeah, so it's kind of a similar type of an architecture, just to repeat that. So I think on last week's Office Hours, we talked about how to set up and scale Prometheus. I think it was related to Brian Ty's, some project that you're working on there, right, Brian? Oh, he's muted. But so the idea here is that Prometheus was designed from the ground up to support basically a federated architecture where you can have Prometheus scraping other Prometheus servers. And in a monitoring infrastructure, especially as that cluster grows, the amount of data and metrics you get will be astronomical, especially under Kubernetes. There was a topic in one of the channels about CloudWatch there, and it came up again like how, like if you were to try and do the same level of monitoring you get with Prometheus in CloudWatch, it would cost you like more than operating the cluster itself, often by an order of magnitude. So the reason why I bring that up is that there's a lot of data. All right, so what you want to do is you're going to have a shorter retention span on your individual clusters that you deploy Prometheus on. So let's say you have a production cluster, staging cluster, maybe you have a couple single tenant dedicated clusters in an enterprise environment, etc. And rather than have to run really powerful clusters, unless your application already necessitates it, you can just run smaller Prometheus clusters. And the way you do that is just by reducing the amount of retention that you have. So now that you've reduced the amount of retention, how do you still have meaningful data that you can view reports over the course of 1 year? And you do that by then having a centralized Prometheus installation, like on a corp or like a shared services cluster. And that's where you set it up to aggregate or to scrape basically the Prometheus of all these other environments. And on this, in this environment, yes, you do need to scale up your servers. You need to allocate at least probably 12, 15 gigs of memory to Prometheus Operator, and you'll have a pretty humming system.
Hey, this is Brian. You mentioned me earlier. I'm just going to say I'm not looking into federated just yet, just because I'm kind of just learning Prometheus. And
it's a lot more work.
It's definitely a lot more, and I'm a single man, or like I'm on basically a one-man team right now working on this. So I've gone the approach of just getting a Prometheus per cluster, with the idea in the back of my mind to move one day possibly to the federated approach.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for the follow-up on kind of your decision thinking there. And yeah,
I can maybe talk about it because we have a Prometheus by namespace and then a centralized Prometheus per cluster, and then an external Prometheus that scrapes all the different clusters. And the different teams usually use the one that is in their namespace. It deploys their own alert manager as well. They're just using Prometheus Operator. But what we have found out, it's very valuable if your cluster goes down, that your Prometheus is still up to investigate issues. So this is what we are doing as well. So
that's really interesting. I hadn't heard of that architecture before. Are you deploying one Prometheus per namespace for the same reason that teams deploy one tiller per namespace?
Yes.
Okay. So for security, more or less.
Yeah, so metrics are not shared between teams, and as well as just like the scalability. It's just like easier to scale this way because you just need one hub basically that is little bit more beefy. But yeah.
And are you guys running Kubernetes as a platform for your company? And what I mean by that, are you guys is like your central operations, whatever you're calling it, deploying, provisioning, or providing Kubernetes clusters that teams use to run both staging and production environments all on the same cluster, or do you separate those two out as well?
That's on a team by team decisions. So we have roughly 22 clusters right now. And a couple of them are staging clusters, but in general, the team can decide if they want to have staging production in one cluster. Most of them have, because they find it simpler.
Okay.
I personally prefer to have multiple clusters.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. The multi-cluster for staging and prod.
Yeah.
So something that if you're I forgot who it was, but somebody was saying I'm a one-man shop kind of thing. Something like Rancher makes it easier to manage, because like if you utilize Rancher for your clusters, you can like just pick from a menu. I would like Prometheus, please, and Rancher will do it for you. And that's just one option. There's a few others out there. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was an alternative to Kinesis, if you want to be agnostic to cloud vendor, is Kafka.
Oh, okay. But
because Kinesis is a AWS service, right? So.
Oh, okay. You're saying going back to the Fluentd. Problem.
Stick Kafka between Fluentd and Elasticsearch, and that also does streaming.
And AWS now has managed Kafka as well. Related to that, though, I don't know if the Amazon service though supports automatic draining to Elasticsearch the way that Kinesis does.
I don't know. The Kafka Elasticsearch Kafka Elasticsearch provider. Is good. It's got lots of community support. It's supported by Confluent, which is the corporate backing behind Kafka. So regardless of what you just said, I don't know. I don't use Kinesis but it's absolutely a viable option.
Exactly. So the cloud agnostic kind of way of doing that would be to use Kafka in the mix.
Yeah. And then we don't do it right now, but we're looking to do that very soon.
Yeah.
Did someone already of you guys operate Kafka with the new Confluent Helm charts? I only operated Kafka in Kubernetes before these charts, and it was always a pain.
I'm using it regularly.
Okay.
They updated their charts recently. They don't work right now in the last week or two. So I had to go back to their 0.10 version.
There's an operator too now.
Yeah, and that's heavy-handed, man. I had a hard time with it. Anyways.
Kafka's. I went to Kafka. I went to the Kafka Summit in San Francisco 6 months ago or whatever, and there's a lot. When it comes to something like Kafka that you kind of have to work with, depending on your use case and stuff. But definitely don't think, oh, I'm just gonna stand up Kafka and it's just gonna work. There's a lot to it. So if you don't have the bandwidth, then something like the AWS managed Kafka.
The default settings are not right out the door.
Or Confluent. If I was going to go with a managed Kafka, I would actually go with Confluence in Confluent Cloud. Sorry, that was it.
Zach, I'm always surprised. You have your hand in so many tools and technologies. I don't know how you keep it all straight.
It's love, my friend. And it still feels like it's never enough, right? So.
Yeah, yeah. Somebody posted in the Helm Files channel earlier today about the Helm File Rube Goldberg apparatus, and I'm guilty for having used that term to poo-poo on other tools of former generations, say Chef and Puppet, right? And let's just face it. The apparatus is not going away. That is the only way that you can integrate all these disparate systems and make them work together.
I'm addicted to declarative. That's all I know. So.
Yeah. Cool. Well, good question, Dale. Any other questions, or do you have any follow-up questions to that, Dale?
Well, I have another question in an entirely different direction, but I'll give someone else an opportunity.
Oh, wait. 1 second, though. Before I jump into that, since you are looking into monitoring options, Brian Tai might have some interesting feedback about using CICD and his experience with that as an alternative.
Hey, Brian.
Are you looking to use a paid monitoring system?
I think you're open to that.
Oh, okay. My thoughts on CICD is, I mean, the actual usability of CICD is actually pretty great. I've been able to create some custom dashboards that have been really helpful for me. And then obviously the monitoring and alerting is pretty decent as well. That's why it's such a big, it's such a well-used monitoring system. My two complaints with it would be it is a resource hog, and it's kind of I just don't understand how something that is monitoring your resources can also be a contributing factor to it to kind of being that thing that causes your or takes away resources from your actual running services that you need to the resources for. And then on top of that, I recently had an issue where the agent was causing a kernel panic on my nodes. And so those two issues have caused me to look elsewhere, primarily Prometheus, because Prometheus follows a different model of how it pulls its data, metrics data, and on top of that, I think it's less of a resource hog. CPU wise, I think it is still memory wise, but offloading that to a remote storage will probably be helpful. Sysdig in itself, like, you're not hosting any, like, it's not storing any data on the Kubernetes cluster itself. It's sending it to their SaaS backend, but still taking 30% CPU, 30% memory on our 4 2x larges. So,
which is sizable considering how much are you already spending for Sysdig, plus 30% of like your EC2 spend. Also,
is also Sysdig.
Exactly. Right? So that, I mean, that's
doing anything like on a back end for like a EKS, AKS, and they're taking their cut of the resources too. So, I mean,
yeah.
I mean, my take on it is if you're on Kubernetes, which is, Cloud Native Computing Foundation, Prometheus is going to have the best support.
Exactly.
Because Prometheus is also a Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So
yeah,
in the monitoring space on Kubernetes, Prometheus is going to have it before anyone else has it.
Yep.
Because of that relationship.
Yeah. I just do want to mention that sometimes you do have to go the route of third-party vendors when you're a small team. You just can't implement everything. And so that's kind of the step that we took, right? You first go with the third-party vendor, until you get to a point where you can afford time to go the open source route and then move off of the third-party vendor.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian, for adding that data point. By the way, Dale just shared something to Office Hours. His looks like a little Raspberry Pi tower. Where'd you get that pretty cool tower with the Kubernetes logo on top?
So that was laser cut with Faber NYC. There's a template online with what's it called? I think his name is Nielsen. I'll post a link to his blog post.
And you just have a laser cutter at home?
Oh, no. I sent it to a company and they just did it.
Yeah, Dale is a special, is a character. You have a real attention to aesthetics and detail. He has a really awesome logo for LunarOps, his side company, and you created what was it, like an etched wood?
Yeah, I'll post it. It's a metal. It's a steel plate.
Yeah.
Through Tinkering Monkey.
Very cool.
Yeah. See, I'm not the only one. Andrew has his cluster as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Eric, I think it helps to be German for that kind of thing.
Probably too. But Dale, you're
yeah, I'm Jamaican.
Yeah. So it runs the gamut.
I had another question in regards to it was Terraform and GitHub Actions. I saw they're doing something similar to Atlantis, and they had a blog post on it. I just posted to the office hours, where they're having the actions do like the formatting. It give you like the whole playout.
Yes.
Have you guys seen it?
Yeah, they were very early on. In fact, I think HashiCorp was involved in kind of like the private beta of GitHub Actions before it was released, because in the very early versions of GitHub Actions, they were actually written in HCL. And then I guess, I don't know what the decision behind it was. They switched to YAML, I guess, since most pipeline formats these days use YAML. So I haven't actually used the official HashiCorp GitHub Actions for Terraform, but yeah, this would be a nice kind of alternative for Atlantis. The downside is managing the AWS credentials for this, and then two is what do you say? Well, okay, so now they have actually GA'd their GitHub Actions runner, so you could deploy the runner like as an ECS task with an IAM role and kind of achieve the same thing. But now it's suddenly not fully managed anymore. So I don't know where what I feel my feelings are about it. Also, I believe that the GitHub Action here actually they only provide a plan step. I don't think they do. You specify the command, so you can specify a sub command of apply. I think that wasn't possible before.
Yeah, in the demo I saw, they still did the apply from the operator's machine. It didn't actually go through with GitHub Action. So it just did all this changes and got approval, and then you actually did deploy it manually.
So my biggest gripe today with GitHub Actions are two things that make them. So look, we're investing a lot into GitHub Actions, and we have a lot there, we've just refactored a bunch of them to use dispatch events, which is a separate topic. But secrets is a big sore spot for GitHub Actions. No shared secrets and no API to set them. So if you have 300 repositories like we do, and then you want to have like a GitHub token so that you can have these dispatch events, we have to update 300 repos. And then if we need to rotate that key, I got to task some individual, some human, to go rotate that in 300 repositories. So that was kind of a setback for us.
Could you, in the action itself, go ahead, man.
Do a sealed secret. Do you do a sealed secret?
A sealed secret, like in a GitHub repo.
Yeah.
But then we would need a secret for the decryption, right? So I mean, it's just off by one.
Kubernetes or something, right? So.
But you at least have one. You at least have one decryption key to manage versus disparate secrets.
Yeah,
but you still would have to update every repo, right? Because the secrets still need to be changed.
Well, so there could be a centralized repo with some of those keys that are sealed, but if we need to rotate, yeah. I mean, so it's basically my concern is if for whatever reason those private keys are compromised, and just good hygiene, right, is to rotate those with some regularity. But if something can't even be rotated, it won't be rotated, right? And then that's a liability.
Yeah.
Honestly, having had the opportunity to manage GitHub Enterprise, there's just really, I don't think they ever really considered that people would have multiple projects.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I feel like, to your point, I feel like they never considered that people would have hundreds or thousands of repositories. And that's why there's also been a backlash against poly repos, and a lot of people, I think, going mono repo, and because it's more manageable at scale than it is to have 1,000 repositories laying around. That said, I mean, I still like poly repos.
You're forced into the poly repo realm if you're going to be doing like Git ops and things like that anyways. So, I mean, you can't do a mono repo and do Git ops. It doesn't work that way. At least not by best practices.
Yeah, so personally, I mentally struggle with that. And yeah, I don't have the answer for that. But one of our customers from last year, they're going that route, Git ops in a mono repo. I'm not sure where they're at right now. But
yeah, I'm struggling with that mindset as well. But it's a hurdle I think a lot of people are dealing with right now.
Yeah,
it's not. I don't think any one person is feeling the pain. I think that's why GitOps sort of emerged.
But
one way around some of these issues. So.
To riff on that for a second, I think maybe one of the answers might be solved controversially by Terraform's approach and best practice for how to manage promotion of changes across multiple environments. And it's novel in the sense that it doesn't use the multi-branching strategy that some people use. And it's controversial because it's not doing deployments on merge, but we've gotten kind of used to that with the Atlantis workflow. And it's controversial because it's not using like the TerraGrunt approach of multiple folders per state. It's not using that approach. It's using the multiple workspace approach where you don't merge a PR until it's actually been applied systematically to every environment. So it's a trunk-based approach to handling GitOps across multiple environments with a pull request workflow.
Doesn't GitLab more or less work that way too?
I don't have strong firsthand experience or haven't spent much time investigating GitLab, mostly because the single pipeline thing is a non-starter for me. Single pipeline per repository? What?
Single pipeline?
Yeah, I believe you can only configure one pipeline per repository, and you got to use conditionals to control if steps run or not. Now, if there's somebody here who can correct me that this has changed in the last year, that'd be awesome. But otherwise, that's
what would be the alternative?
Say that one more time.
What's the alternative?
Oh, conditionals on every step. So
no,
run
what
this.
would you do? What would you do instead if you were able to have multiple? Like what? like different pipelines that just do different things that just all watch the same repo?
Yeah, we do that all the
Gotcha.
time. So we have a pipeline that kicks off when a release webhook is triggered. We have a pipeline that kicks off when a pull request is updated or synchronized. We have a pipeline that kicks off when the pull request is closed. We have a all these different pipelines that trigger on different events. And yes, we could have them all in one pipeline, but that's an ugly looking pipeline and it's not really readable what's, how these things work and when they.
Sure. Yeah. No, that makes sense. So I use GitLab extensively. I don't use pipelines, GitLab pipelines. We use Jenkins. So,
oh, you're muted, Blaze. Blaze, you're muted.
I was just about to say you could do Jenkins and then have like Jenkins files.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
I whenever possible, we try to stay agnostic because we never know, what's going to come down the pipe later on, which is why we haven't used GitLab pipelines, which is why, I don't really use GitHub Actions because it's locked into GitLab, versus Jenkins, CodeFresh, CircleCI, Travis, whatever. They don't care where it's coming from. It's just a Git repo.
Yeah.
So,
But groovy, dude. Groovy. Oh.
I don't care about Groovy. Groovy's fine.
Well, Groovy's fine. Keep in mind, though, that the the Jenkins orthodox recommendation is to keep your build logic outside of the Jenkins file and to just use Jenkins for managing the credentials and the scheduling and resource allocation. So I think in practice, people do unnatural things with Groovy and then they complain,
So what we do is we use GoTask, which is just a Go implementation, kind of similar to Make, but it uses YAML files instead of like a Make file. And we really like it a lot. But exactly what Blaze just said, like my deploy task in Jenkins sets up the credentials and then is task deploy.
Right.
And that's it. So like that's all the Jenkins, that's all the Groovy that I have to write, and at that point it's not even Groovy because it's shell.
Right. Yeah, I more or less agree with that the pipeline should be almost written like an interface and just offload then the complexity of what that deploy is then to some other thing that the developer can manage in their context. Have you, I've seen GoTask, have you also seen Variant by Mamushu?
Nope.
Variant is a cool tool we've talked about in older office hours. We haven't been working that much on that side of things to have it fresh in my mind. What's interesting is Variant also has a YAML syntax. However, Mamushu has just re-implemented Variant called Variant. So here's the original Variant in the office hours channel. It's github.com/mumoshu/variant. And then here's his new version, which is using HCL. And it's really a cool concept because what he has is the ability basically to pipeline your steps so that outputs of one step can be used as inputs for another step. These things are all debatable, but arguably I think Variant scripts are very readable. The downside is that there could be more documentation with all these things. You're muted again, Blaze.
Sorry, when you say there could be more documentation, do you mean to say that documentation may result, in other words, may be a byproduct of this? Or
No. It's just like, like a lot of things in open source is that the documentation is really scoped to the README, and there could be a lot, but the README looks like you can do like 3 things when you can do like hundreds of things with Variant. The cool concept of Variant is it was designed so you can create a universal CLI tool for your company that stitches all the other tools together, and it allows you to basically define, like, so so here's an example of your variant script. So you set variant as your interpreter. You don't have to run it this way, but you can. So you can call variant on your script, or you can set variant as your interpreter. And if you do that, then here's your script. So here I'm defining my make file, so to say, in the variant schema. And here are the tasks. So one task is called bar, and it's going to run a script that does this. And then another task is called foo. And foo has an argument called bar. But what's interesting is if I don't pass that argument bar, it's actually going to call this argument here to get the value for bar. So this is an example of having another task provide the input for any of my parameters here. And you can nest these things, so you can have as many layers deep as you want. And ultimately, what you're exposing to your end users is a modern CLI interface that looks like any modern CLI you're familiar with. So like kubectl or Terraform or Helm, all of those have a pretty well-defined CLI interface. What I like about this, going back to the conversation of the Rube Goldberg apparatus, is yes, this is what we're faced with. We have a lot of tools, but we in the end need to tie them together to get our job done. How do we do that and yet provide a consistent interface? Yes, one day we can write this whole thing in a beautiful CLI tool for our company, but can we invest in that today and right now? Probably not. That's where Variant comes in. It lets you prototype what the interface for a CLI tool for your company, what that would look like, and you get the immediate gratification and benefits of it today.
Well, that's super cool. It reminds me of Ansible, but less, with less plumbing.
Yeah, so I've heard that before. Like people say, well, you could just use Ansible for that. True, you could. I hate the Ansible command line experience, and it doesn't feel very modern to me. Also, this is in Go, so it's a single binary. You can ship with your systems. We distribute it as part of the Cloud Posse packages repository, and that's why I like it more than Ansible.
Oh, yeah. No, Ansible is more for, you've got a Swiss Army knife, so you can get anywhere that you can get to SSH.
Yeah.
It's not something you want to necessarily bundle into a distribution.
Exactly. And you could say that this is a meta tool that would sit like, okay, great, you're using Ansible. What calls Ansible? Variant. So Variant is like the meta tool that calls all the other tools, that lets you describe how to use them for everything. Plus, unlike Makefiles, they have the concept of like a description built in here, so you can add a description of every parameter and every step and what it does. So you get it. So it's naturally annotated task definitions with a very clean output. Then when you run help,
it's a bash as a service.
Kind of. Yeah.
So the output is an executable.
Actually, they have two things. He has built. So yeah, you guys, if you've attended office hours a lot, you know my crush on Mamushu and his genius here. But one of the things that he has done with this thing is you can run it. There are like 3 or 4 ways you can invoke it. One way you can invoke it is just by calling the variant. By calling variant on your script. The second way is the interpreted version like this.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And the third way is he provides a variant as a library, and then he provides a shim, like an example here, where you can just create this little shim here in a Go file, and then you can compile your variant logic into an executable that you can then distribute. And I think he actually bundles it with like a minimal bash interpreter or something, so you don't even need like bash or whatever on the system. So is it, does this produce elegant code? No, but I think it's an elegant solution to a messy problem with like minimal effort.
Well, I think what's beautiful about this, particularly in the context of the Kubernetes world, is the glue, right? Is the having like the single entry point.
Yeah.
So like Pierre and I hang out in the open FOSS which is sort of growing in complexity. And there are like all of these various CLI tools for like the submodules.
Yep. Yeah, no, and exactly. And then and this is just the pattern. Like every tool, every new project comes with its own tool. And like, I was pretty happy with Istio working as a Helm chart, but no, Istio decides they need the Istio CTL to install it. So now we need to call Istio CTL and work that into our pipeline. That's outside of our control. The community decided that was the best choice. I'm not going to fight it. They're thought leaders on that. Great. Okay, how do we wrap that? Well, I guess this is maybe the universal tool for doing that. So what I'm showing you here is Mamushu's latest version, which is a kind of a simpler rewrite of the original variant. And he actually embraced HashiCorp's language for this. And arguably, this is a lot more readable if you at least come from a Terraform background. But all things are relative, right? People hate that Jenkins declarative pipelines aren't, are their own kind of language, Groovy, I guess, and not YAML. And then, people who have YAML are, I don't know, wishing they didn't have that. Maybe.
I will say one thing for the Groovy is I can export the what do you call it? The code hinting, and pull it up in like IntelliJ, and it'll give me auto completes, full auto completes for like all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, that is cool. That is cool.
But I have the same, for example, for Circle CI. They offer a JSON schema, and my IntelliJ can pick it up and see.
That's nice.
Based on that JSON schema, how there's an auto-completion with, for example, which tag to use on a Docker image, like that you get with a Docker file. But it works well enough to be usable.
Yeah, that's. This is a kind of stupid question, but I mean, since YAML and JSON are more or less interchangeable, can you still write your Circle pipelines in YAML? And
it's not more or less. It's YAML is a superset of JSON.
Oh, superset, right? Yeah. Uh-huh.
Like you can. I don't think you can go YAML to JSON all the time, but you can 100% of the time go JSON to YAML.
So does this JSON spec for the Circle pipelines for the schema, can you still write your pipelines in YAML but get the benefit of that spec, that schema?
Yes.
Oh,
that's
cool.
how we are working. So I think under the hood it transforms it to JSON and compares it to the spec.
Behind the scenes, yeah.
Yeah. So, but I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, we write in YAML and not in JSON.
Okay.
One question that I have to your Jenkins exploration. Did you already talk about it? No, right?
No. We basically, it was just a talking point. We've briefly rubbed up against Jenkins a few times today, but haven't really. Nothing was prepared on this. It was more like if you read over this, I posted it to office hours. If you have anything to add that I got wrong or I should have added, let me know. Or share your love or hate of Jenkins in 2020.
Maybe Andrew can answer it. But is it possible to have conditional steps like? With CodeFresh, you can have I really love CodeFresh. I explored it the last couple of weeks. It's an awesome tool. But you can, for example, have a conditional step that is based on an output of a previous pipeline job, which I really, really love. Is that possible with Jenkins or not?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. For the record, I love CodeFresh too. Like, if I had people throwing money at me, I would totally use CodeFresh, but I don't.
Yeah,
so.
their pricing model is quite steep.
It didn't. Their pricing model was a heck of a lot better than Cloudbees Core.
Okay.
Yeah, Cloudbees was like we were going. Really, it's that much?
Yeah,
it's not scalable for us.
Yeah, right. So the pricing I would much rather pay for minutes per pipeline or per plan instead of machines, because I pay full VM price machines, but only use them, cannot use them parallel and stuff. It's like it's not really something that works for us as an enterprise, but for private people, it works really well, especially since the first pipeline is free.
So one thing that I'll say that I'm really unhappy about is about Jenkins X. You talked about it, a little bit in your document, and it was discussed a little bit. Jenkins X is a completely different project than Jenkins. They don't share anything.
Yep.
And people don't realize that when they look at it. They go, "Oh, this is Jenkins reimagined to be Kubernetes native." No, it's not. It's a completely new project that has Jenkins branding all over it.
They should almost,
because of whatever reason.
They should probably get rid of. They should probably not call it Jenkins anymore. They should come up with another name of a butler.
I agree.
Well, but they called it Jenkins because of the name Jenkins. Like, there's weight behind that name.
There's tremendous brand value, but also pigeonholing.
Yeah,
right.
You should call it Jarvis or something.
Yeah,
Jarvis X.
So I don't like the fact that they confuse people to think that, oh, I use Jenkins now, it should just be super simple to go to Jenkins. No, it's like completely different.
Yeah, it's like upgrading from my iPhone 9 to or iPhone 8 to my iPhone 10, right? No,
it's like going from your iPhone to an Android.
Exactly, totally different. Yeah.
It's JavaScript.
By the way, on the topic
JavaScript
of
Java Gambit.
Oh, sorry. What was that?
JavaScript and Java. They tried.
Yeah. It's that degree of difference. Yeah.
And that still gets people 25 years later.
It does. Somebody posted a pretty funny thing in the Jobs channel about a company making that mistake recently. I think you called it out even, Andrew. I forget who it was.
It was me. Yeah.
Yeah.
On the topic of CI and CodeFresh, I found out recently they actually made a pretty big change in the back end on their SaaS platform that basically went from a persistent volume per pipeline to persistent volume per account, and that's severely killed my Docker cache hits percentage. So I get a lot more Docker.
Why would it limit it? Oh yeah, you sent that post to me in a private message.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty complicated explanation for me from their support that I didn't fully understand. Can you explain why the one volume per account would obliterate your cache hits?
Because they went from a volume that is supposedly 40 gigs of or space per pipeline to, I assume, that same size volume per account. And so I am at my volume is at a point where it's storing about 70 to 80% of its space is stored with Docker images. And so at that point, they start cleaning up the images that are cached on there. And so when it was per pipeline, there would be a lot more Docker cache hits than now. And I had noticed that like the build times are taking longer. And then he actually sent a graph like, oh yeah, this was before the support guy realized this, that they had made that change. He was like, oh yeah, in the last 2 months, it looks like your build times average had gone up. And you can see like the line goes up in his graph that he sent me. And then I was like, we haven't made any changes. What's changed? And then that's when he said, oh, I just realized they had made this change. And once you get to about 70%, 80% usage of that volume, they start cleaning up the Docker layers. So for me, that was.
So if you're building a lot of different Docker images all the time for different services that share a number of layers.
It's just multiple services, different layers, and then those all add on, and then so they'll clean up the ones on the bottom, but then, or the least used ones. But then, for us, we have some pretty large images, and so the chances of those layers getting removed is a lot higher because of the layer sizes.
This actually brings up a question that I have related to Docker layer caching and image caching for Andrew, since I think you have some of the most Jenkins experience here. So I got Jenkins Docker builds working, or communication with the Docker socket working under Jenkins on Kubernetes. I didn't try using Podman or any of the other things because I couldn't find any examples of how to do that. I totally get the value of it and why to do it. I just couldn't find any good examples of doing it. Plus, I would love to have a declarative way of describing that as well, and I couldn't see any plugin for Jenkins.
Examples for how to use Podman?
Under Jenkins, under Kubernetes.
Well, you're not going to, Podman's just a CLI tool. So, I would just go to the Podman docs for that, right? Because Podman runs daemonless, so you don't need the Docker sock or anything for Podman. So, you can run it in a non-privileged, non-root container, and I think you.
So I would have a container. I would have a container template like this for Podman, and then I would use that Podman container to build my Docker file. But where do I stick that artifact now? That image.
It's an OCI image. You can put it in a Docker registry.
Okay.
Anywhere, any Docker registry.
And
Play.io, Docker Hub, GitLab, anything.
And with Podman, is it going to simplify my ability to have layer caching? Could I have an EFS file system with a shared layer cache or something? Or how would I achieve layer caching across a cluster of build machines?
Yeah, I don't do any layer caching right now, so I can't give you any answers from experience. But what you just said sounds like it would work fine. An EFS volume that you would mount. If
POSIX locking is sufficient, and if it does POSIX locking.
I have to believe it does.
Well, it doesn't modify the layers that it's pulling from. So
there's no index where it like a B tree index on disk somewhere where
I don't. Yeah, you'll have to try it out, but I doubt you're gonna. It should work fine. Famous last words.
Yeah, I don't think it would actually be modifying or requires to lock it. It's just pulling that image in.
That's what CodeFresh does. They just mount a persistent volume.
Yeah.
Right? That's how they do layer caching. They mount a persistent volume. So you're just using it, you're using EFS or whatever instead of whatever they're using.
Yeah, so that solution should work fine.
But they do it with one node, right? They don't do it with multiple nodes.
It shouldn't matter.
Yeah, so I just know how CodeFresh on-prem works, and on-prem it after every step it synchronizes your image up to the Docker registry, and then the next step pulls it down, and the next step could run on another machine. So they're not actually mounting a volume in that sense. They're actually exploiting the Docker registry as a file system for snapshots of file system. So when we ran CodeFresh on-prem, it was very slow actually. If our builds were constantly getting scheduled onto a different node because that node didn't have the layers downloaded yet, and it would have to be downloaded.
Yeah, and I will say that's one of the slower parts of my pipeline is because it has to, it doesn't do any layer caching on the Docker container. However, I am certainly following the best practice of having when it comes to app development, and obviously, depending on what your goal is, but if you're developing an app, your Docker file should have 2 lines in it. It should be, from whatever the base is, and then copy your built binary or whatever, and that's it. Like that's your entire Docker file for your app. And so at that point, your base is cached on every node because it doesn't really change. I mean, unless you change your Docker file to point to a different base because you changed something in the base. But yeah, as far as looking at best practices for for building Docker containers when you're doing application development, is to make that Docker file ridiculously small in the actual application pipeline, and offload whatever the buildup of the base container is into a different pipeline.
What if you have a language that doesn't compile into a binary?
Just copy like Node.js or whatever. Just copy the JS files or whatever into if it's like an Nginx base image or whatever, you copy them into the the www folder or something. Or
I think you're supposed to actually copy the package file first, and then
layer that,
and install the dependent packages, and then copy the rest over. Just because, I mean, I don't think you use Docker layer caching, but if you were to use Docker layer caching, that will help.
Yeah.
Build
helps, absolutely.
It helps for the second build.
Yeah. So you do two. Yeah, absolutely. So your Docker file when you're doing npm is a great example. Like in your Docker file, your first layer is like npm CI or whatever, which just pulls down all the dependencies, and then you so it's copy package.json and only package.json, and then it's like npm CI or whatever, and then you copy all your other files in. That way you're not busting your cache every time you change a file.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point.
But like I am developing a Java Spring Boot application right now, and it's literally just build the jar, and then it's from OpenJDK or whatever, drop in the jar, and then away we go. That's all I do.
Yeah.
So in that case, are you compiling locally?
Yeah.
I see.
Because I do all kinds of other stuff too. I do unit tests, I do SonarQube, I do all that other junk before I even build the Docker container.
So you have your artifacts committed into your Git repo?
No. I'm building my artifact in the pipeline.
Okay.
I see. You're cloning first and then building the artifact and then building the Docker image.
Yeah.
I see.
Okay.
All right. Let's see here. So I think that pretty much wraps it up for today. I appreciate everyone sharing their thoughts on this stuff. I learned a lot on the Jenkins stuff and on the monitoring side. We will be having a call same time, same place next week, 11:30 a.m. Pacific, and stay tuned for a recording of this call posted in a couple hours to the Office Hours channel. Thanks again, and see you guys next week.
All right.
All right. Bye, guys.
Thanks. See ya.